Well, hi, I want to thank you all for coming. It's an honor to have so many of you here tonight. This is my first trip to the Pittsburg in Kansas, although my wife grew up in the Pittsburg in Pennsylvania, so I feel very much at home. When I first came here, my first two nights in Kansas, Sunday night and Monday evening this week, I was scheduled to give full-blown lectures, so standard academic 55-minute lecture. And I love to show slides. I'm a microscopist by training, so I'm a very visual sort of guy. So I almost want to let you know, I'll know what you're missing. These are the first parts of the lectures, and then here is the second part. So you've just seen a 55-minute lecture without all the associated things. And I am going to tell you a few things that come out of that, but as Harry said, I want to keep it as brief as I can. I want to provide an introduction, and then I want to have a discussion, and I hope it will go well. In fact, I know it will. I am a cell biologist. I'm often introduced as an evolutionary biologist, but I'm not. I work with the electron microscope. I work on the structure and function of biological membranes. That's a picture of me in my lab at Brown University, which is in Providence, Rhode Island. It's a great place. I've been there for 30 years. I'm actually an undergrad alum of the place, so it's very cool to go back there as a faculty member. I publish in journals like Cell. This is a cover story our lab had a few years ago, the Journal of Cell Biology and so forth. I used to edit the Journal of Cell Biology, so that's sort of like my number one job. How did a nice cell biologist who works in a dark room with a high-power microscope get involved in evolution? Well, the answer to that is, in a moment of weakness, I allowed a former student of mine to talk me into doing something absolutely insane, and that is writing a high school biology textbook. And that guy's name was Joe Levine, and some of the younger people in the room may actually recognize some of the covers of these books. And it's been an extraordinary experience. I've been blessed with two daughters. My oldest daughter, Lauren, who's a wildlife biologist who works for the Audubon Society, lucky her, managed to graduate from Dighton-Rehoboth Regional High School in Massachusetts, which is where we live, before my first book was published. Tracy, my younger daughter, not so lucky. And so Tracy had to suffer the indignity of using her old man's textbook for 9th grade biology. It was the one with the elephant on the cover. And you might think that's an interesting thing. And Harry has heard me tell one story about that textbook. So tonight I'll tell you another. And that is, again, my daughter is in 9th grade. There's that textbook. And I was pretty well known, especially to the girls in town, because for almost a decade I was kind of like the commissioner of the girls' softball program in Rehoboth. So I knew a lot of my daughter's friends. And during that school year, you have no idea how many of these kids, who I had coached and mentored and stuff like that, would call me up for advice and homework and stuff like that. But the most interesting thing came about 2 months into the school year, and we're having dinner at night, and Tracy turns to me while we're having dinner, and all of you who are parents know how rare and unexpected it is to have a son or a daughter ever say anything complimentary to you, that they admire your work, or it just almost never happens. So Tracy turns to me and she says, "Dad, because of you, I'm the envy of all the kids in my biology class." And I thought, wow, this is going to be one of those rare moments when your kid appreciates something you did. So I puffed out my chest and I started to smile. And for a moment or two, I felt very good. And then she said, "Yeah, I'm the envy of them because I'm the only one who doesn't have to lug that huge book home at night." Because it turns out the kids would say, "Tracy, you didn't carry the book." He says, "My dad wrote it, I got a copy at home." Then they envied her because she didn't have to schlep the thing home. Joe and I have continued to write and to work, and we have a brand new book that just came out this year that has really done very well throughout the country. I've also written a couple of popular books on evolution. The first one is called Finding Darwin's God, a scientist's search for common ground between God and evolution. I wanted to write this book for a long time, and finally I did. I didn't expect too much of it, because books about science are almost never bestsellers. This book, however, to my amazement, is now in its 37th printing in paperback. And what that tells me as much as anything else is how hungry people are in the US to see somebody address issues sort of at the interface of science and religion. Well, a lot has happened since I wrote that book, and about a year and a half ago I published another book called Only a Theory, Evolution and the Battle for America's Soul, and that book has a lot about Kansas in it, in terms of what has happened here one way or another. Now, one of the things I thought I'd mention right up front, I wanted to let you know sort of where I came from and how I got interested in science. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and I have to say, looking back, I think I got a great education in science. And I came from a relatively poor community, a grimy little industrial town in New Jersey. But I want to let you know who I am grateful to for giving me that great education in science. It's the commies. And the reason for that is in 1957, when I was in 5th grade, the Russians launched Sputnik. Now, those of you who are, the younger people are saying, what's the big deal? Those of you who are a certain age know what a shock it was to this country to think the Russians had beat us into space. And the reaction to that shock was just an infusion of money, equipment, new curriculum, and human effort into science and math education. And people in my generation, in the sciences, we rode that wave of intense education right into scientific careers. So I feel enormously lucky that the Soviets shocked us by putting Sputnik up first. That was one thing. Another thing that helped me a great deal, quite frankly, was the culture of the 1950s and early 1960s. I want to show you pictures from my favorite TV show. And once again, those of you of a certain age will know this guy. These are scenes from a program called Mr. Wizard. And where I grew up, Mr. Wizard was on every Saturday morning, and I just thrived on this thing. Now, for those of you who don't know the program, let me explain the premise to you. Single man living alone. Every Saturday morning, he invites 2 or 3 kids into his house to do experiments. Clearly, it was a more innocent age than it would be today. I can't imagine trying to do the same thing, but that was the premise of the show. And the really cool thing about these experiments is everything he did, you could go into your mom's kitchen or your dad's workshop and you could do it yourself. And I used to do all those experiments, and I remembered 9 or 10 of them just from memory, and I redid them with my own kids, and it just blew them away. They just love these experiments. What it convinced people like me was that I could do science. This wasn't something that was so specialized and so esoteric. So I really felt like I could do it, and from like 5th or 6th grade on, I never considered a career at anything else but science. I wasn't sure that I'd be a college professor, but I knew I wanted to be a scientist. And this was also aided by other things that were part of the culture of the late 50s and early 60s. Things like erector sets, chemistry sets. And if you think I'm kidding you about how pivotal stuff like this was in my growing up or the people in my era, I'm bringing you documentary evidence on my 12th birthday. There I am with my chemistry set in the basement of my house in New Jersey. And my little gift there's a microscope on that table, and that was my birthday gift that year. So that's the sort of thing. And what this propelled me to was a career in research. And the research subject that fascinated me and continues to fascinate me is the chloroplast, the part of plants that captures the energy of sunlight and changes it into chemical energy.